Alright guys, today we'll take a look at 15 of the best weapons in Shadow of the Erdtree. This is in no particular order and specifically for PvE. We're going to focus on the non-boss remembrance weapons and it's going to go over the ones you can most easily find but also get the most out of in terms of either movesets or weapon skills. Now, the first weapon I wished more people talked about is the Greatsword of Solitude. Despite being possibly the heaviest greatsword in the game, its moveset is actually really fast. It also comes with a very versatile skill, which is the Solitary Moonslash, so you don't just get a, well, projectile attack here, but also a very strong heavy follow-up. So the damage on the projectile initially is not the highest, but your follow-up heavy is going to do most of the work here. It's downright bowling, especially against many of the shield enemies, and has almost the same spin swipe hit animation that knocks out enemies through their shields, just like your running light attack with the same greatsword. Its most unique aspect, of course, is also its very high default physical damage negation. It's pretty much 89, and you also get a 58 into guard boost. So it's literally better than most shields out there, which is why it might explain its higher weight than most normal weapons, because you literally have one of the best greatswords in the game, which also couples as a very awesome shield. So in the DLC, you can use a deflecting heart tier, which is literally going to make you unstoppable and give you some of the best guard countering in the game. Another one I was extremely surprised by is the Claw of Night. Well, first of all, because claws are just amazing in the game. They have really fast damage, they have really fast moves. This is a pure dex scaling weapon, by the way, so it gets a B into that, but it also comes with a 45 into bleed build-up. So despite the lower build-up, its scattershot throw skill seems to trigger that extremely often. It seems to be a status effect triggering machine, which is going to cause bleed build-up almost every other shot at most. And that's because of the shotgun-like effect hit that absolutely pierces through enemies. And it also seems to deal very good damage, even at a decent range. It also gets boosted by the smithing talisman, by the way, from the DLC, since its damage counts as a thrown weapon. Also, its charged heavy can be backstabbed out of without interrupting the hit. So if you want to like dodge an incoming attack but don't want to sacrifice while interrupting your attack, you can still press circle during that charge animation and your character is just going to do a step back followed by a hit. For the next couple of spots, we have the Death Knight Greataxe as well as the Death Knight Twin Axe, so they kinda both function similarly. They have the Blink Bolt ability, which comes with a very nice damage follow-up. But the Blink Bolt specifically is really awesome. You pretty much have free iframes, it triggers super fast, travels really far too, and like I said, the follow-up is both strong as well as very fun. This is like one of the funnest weapons to play with in the DLC. The damage is not too bad either, however in the case of the Greataxe you do get some hyper armor, while in the case of the Twin Axes you basically don't get any or very little. So it's very easy to interrupt yourself out of the Twin Axes if enemies even like graze you, but in the case of the Greataxe you can still pull it off relatively easily. This works really well for a predominantly dex and faith build in the case of the Twin Axe, or strength/faith in the case of the Greataxe. Plus, you're going to have a ton of fun with it, even though they do only come unfortunately with the basic axe movements. Now, the next weapon pretty much carried me halfway through the DLC. It's the Black Steel Greathammer, and it's actually another versatile option. So this gives you a bonus damage when you infuse it or imbue it with holy damage. However, because of the bonuses you get from strength and faith scaling, it seems that Flame Art is actually going to pull ahead in terms of damage and attack rating. So that's going to be your best option if you want to just maximize its damage. It also has a very unique guard counter, which unleashes a holy wave followed by a quick explosion at the enemy's feet. So all in all, this is a great weapon at stunning enemies. It's pretty much a great hammer, so the stagger damage is really great. You also have the guard counter, which is really good, and it's best coupled with a Lion's Claw. Now, previously I used Savage Lion's Claw for the faster hits, but the basic Lion's Claw might be the best option, specifically because it's much better and deals much higher stance damage. It's also one of the weapons with a really good physical negation, pretty much 80, so it can work as a shield, and having this coupled with a deflecting tier once again. For our next weapon, we have the Milady. So this is a light greatsword which pairs really well with its, well, wing stance, which is the one that it should come with by default, but for some reason it does not. So this, when coupled with the wing stance, yeah, the range and the damage on this is really good. First of all, because the wing stance heavy reaches enemies way further away than you might think. So it's a poke attack, pierce damage, which actually reaches enemies very far away. And it can oftentimes exceed 5,000 damage on the builds that I've tested. Compared to some of the other builds, it can actually reach some really great numbers. Also, it's a great status builder, specifically because of its R1 chain during the wing stance. So this can actually work really well on a bleed affinity as well. You kind of get about 83 into that. So about like 3-4 hits, so 2 rounds of that, you're pretty much going to cause a blow loss proc. So this actually will work really well with a Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, a Relana Talisman as well to buff the stance damage, but it can also go with some of the other bleed buffing talismans and gear. For the next one, we have the Backhand Blade. So just like in the case of Milady, this also shines when coupled with its accompanying Ash of War, in this case, the Blind Spot. So Blind Spot is what makes this so amazing. It's pretty much iframes, very instant, very fast, a good reposition, and a very good way actually to completely counter many of the toughest challenges at the beginning of the DLC. And you can still imbue your weapon if you don't put it with like a magical affinity, so you can totally put like a Blood Flame Blade on it and deal some nice damage with a build like that. It might not give you the highest burst, but it keeps you so safe during these moments that it's very easy to basically just steamroll through the DLC. And despite its position when held, it doesn't suffer on its weapon reach. So even if you go with a bleed or status effect, you can still use the regular jump and run animations from the curved swords and proc a ton of bleed. Moving on, next, of course, we have the Ancient Meteoric or Greatsword. So this is the go-to arcane melee weapon in the DLC that doesn't actually use any bleed buildup. So its arcane scaling, despite being rather poor, or at least appearing poor on the weapon card, it actually provides a substantial damage increase. First of all, it buffs physical damage as well to a certain degree, not just the magic damage, but it's going to buff your weapon skill the most. This is the one that benefits the most out of it, and this is how you can easily reach over 5k damage on it. Plus, of course, that's only on the follow-up explosion, so the initial stab is like another 2,000-3,000 easily. It's also a great gap closer, it's great at stance breaking enemies, and it reaches a really great AR when using a double strength and arcane build. Plus, did I mention how absolutely awesome it looks? This thing is seriously something that should be on everybody's top tier list. For the next one, we have the Dragon Hunter Great Katana, a great quality build weapon, and despite having a special effect, no, it does not scale off arcane or anything besides strength and dexterity. Even its weapon skill scales off the weapon level. Now, the Dragon Wound Slash is its special weapon art. The damage on this and the way the skill works is pretty much the ultimate dragon hard counter. Some people might not like the fact that this moveset is lacking a follow-up, but this should be brought in the fights where it truly shines, which is against dragons. So first of all, the special skill gets a bonus damage against dragon enemies by default. So adding something like Shard of Alexander and Godfrey Icon, since this skill is a charged attack, will boost that damage really nicely. Second of all, because of the jump animation and the way it angles, it's perfectly suited to constantly aim at the enemy's upper body, especially their heads. Your biggest problem against dragons is usually their height, as well as many ground AoEs, while this weapon skill literally just bypasses both of those problems while letting you deal a ton of damage in style. This is how I managed to defeat Bale, by the way, on my first try with this weapon, besides the fact that my other builds were kind of struggling with it really hard. Now, moving on, next we have the Sword of the Night, and I'm not going to lie, I wished that I loved this a bit more, because I mean, the way it looks is absolutely amazing, and I'm hearing some mixed opinions on its damage. Well, I kind of tend to fall in the category that doesn't like it that much in terms of the damage it deals. So the skill on it is called the Witching Hour Slash. It looks really cool. It's not like the worst skill in the game, but it's very easy to interrupt. It has a very long wind up, kind of like all the other stance attacks, but worse. Plus, you can't really move too far away from it, so you're kind of stationary. And there are other skills in the game that are much better at dealing multi-hits or proccing bleed or blood loss buildup. It does benefit from multi-hit talismans like the Rotten Wings sword, as well as Millicent Prosthesis, and also some of the bleed build-up staple gear, but of course you're going to need quite a bit to make the most out of it and fully buff its damage, and you are kinda tied to paying attention to enemies' movesets and finding the perfect opening to actually unleash the full charge up attack. In the meantime, you're kinda stuck in just doing its quicker release, which deals less hits and less damage, and as such lower bleed buildup, which is already low on this weapon at only 45. In my personal opinion, I think that this could go with a buff in one of the upcoming patches. Moving on, next we have the Anvil Hammer. Now this isn't the worst colossal weapon in the game. It comes with a faith scaling that's so good that it basically, just boosts the fire as well as the physical damage on the weapon, which is what lets this weapon reach higher attack ratings than most other weapons. This does not necessarily translate in higher DPS because of the way and the limited range of the way the Astral War works, but it's actually really fun to pull off when it does work. Its weapon art is called Smithing Art Spear. It behaves almost like an eruption, except that the follow-up is a bunch of spikes that emerge from the ground, and they can actually take 2 times for extra damage against targets lingering inside the AoE. So if you do manage to hit enemies properly with the entire hit, you're going to eventually stun them relatively easily. However, there are some limitations to this weapon, so it's very easy to miss with the weapon art. It's also very easy to get locked into perpetual weapon art animations, especially if you press the buttons just slightly too fast. Like, this is the only weapon in the DLC that I noticed this problem with. Moving on to the next one, we have the Barbed Staff Spear, another weapon giving some love to holy builds in the DLC, though this one is a bit more unique. So its skill, called Jory's Inquisition, unleashes a high number of rapid holy arcs that can also stack bleed buildup on targets. So the weapon comes with about 55 blood loss buildup by default, but it seems it's not only its physical attacks that can cause it, but also its weapon art. So this actually couples really well with a shield. It is a great spear, so it's going to give you a really good range while you're over there protecting yourself or doing guard counters. Which, by the way, guard counters deal some nice poise damage, so typically you're going to stun most regular enemies right away. And this is typically the point I recommend using the weapon's special ability. The Jory's Inquisition, when casted from that point, is going to mostly aim all of its attacks straight to the enemy's face. So you get the bonus damage, quick bleed buildup, if they even survive by that point, and I mean, the Astral War does not consume that much resource in terms of FP and stamina. You can still spam it from afar if you want to, but the tracking, range, and area of cover are not going to be the best, plus some enemies can dodge some of them. For the next one, we have the Fire Knight Greatsword. It's one of the best greatswords and possibly one of the best weapons in the DLC for both PvE and PvP. So this gets excellent damage with a Flame Art affinity and any of the new Flame Knight Ashes of War, be it the Spear or the Skewer. However, it could get even higher damage because it's currently suffering from a bug. So it seems that Flame Imbuements don't actually improve its AR as much as the tooltip is implying, but rather it seems that holy imbuements do that. So clearly a bug, and hopefully it's going to get fixed in the future, but once it does, it's going to be even higher in terms of damage. That being said, its moveset is also really awesome. So you have the super fast R1 hits, pretty much like the Godslayer Greatsword. It also has the poke moveset when you do a dodge and then heavy attack. You also have the true combo if you go with the Skewer, and R1 hits are very easy to follow up from pretty much any attack, be it Ash of War or heavy follow-up. And because you hit so fast with great poise damage, it quickly stuns enemies very easily. So pure, like, max tier, very great weapon to have in the new DLC. Moving on, next we have the Falx. Don't get fooled by the way it looks, it's actually just a curved sword. However, one that comes with a really awesome skill called the Revenger's Blade. Now, I like this one. I like it for a few reasons. One, it's that it gives you insane hyper armor both during the run and also during the heavy follow-up. The heavy follow-up is also really insane. It deals really good damage, seems to be really good at interrupting enemies, and it just makes bosses like Milady pretty much seem like easy mode. It's going to trigger bleed build-up fairly well too. It only has like 55, but you can basically just hit so many times with the Ravager's follow-up that it triggers every single time. That's why it pairs so well with something like Rotten Wings Sword Insignia, Millicent Prosthesis, but also Lords of Blood Exaltation and the White Mask. This can actually make a really solid build that absolutely demolishes things in the DLC but also in the base game. It also has the curved swords movesets on the jump and the run animation, so even without its weapon art, you can have at least like 4, 6, 8 hits per jump or run, which stacks bleed really well too. Getting closer to the finish, the next one is going to be the Bloodfiend Blood Arm. We covered this in a previous bleed build, but this, when infused with the bleed affinity, this gets over 200 bloodlust build-up, which is what makes it so absolutely insane. And if that wasn't enough, its charged heavy hit also causes a slight additional bleed buildup as shown from the follow-up blood splatter. So really, you're pretty much going to have a guaranteed explosion of blood within one single charged hit. This is why it pairs so well with a Royal Knight's Resolve, a Godfrey Icon, a Shard of Alexander, and well, pretty much from this point on, whatever you want, including those bleed buff items. This is what basically almost one-shots bosses through every single one of their phases. You, of course, have to buff yourself quite well, but even if you don't, you're going to see some staggering damage numbers. And speaking of that, when fully charged, you're going to pull off about 42 stance damage with it, which is what's going to fully demolish your enemies. So really awesome weapon. The only kind of drawback about it is that you do need to be careful about positioning, and you do need to find windows of enough time to pull off a full charged heavy. But even if you don't, you can just use different Ashes of War or just jump attacks, and it's still going to fare really well. And finally, we of course, to nobody's surprise, have the Perfumer Bottles, specifically they plus the Rolling Sparks Ashes of War, which are the current PvE meta, and they even destroy in PvP. So for some reason, I think that From Software just forgot about us and probably forgot about, well, just nerfing things. That or the absolute biggest nerf of all time is coming our way, because there's no way this still survives the next month. But basically, this is going to reach insane amounts of damage in the tens of thousands against almost any, well, enemy in the game, including bosses. It literally works with any Perfumer bottle too, especially the Lightning, which is going to be the best suited since you take advantage of both Dex and Faith, which also gets to apply self buffs. But there's other variants like Magic via Cold Bottle, you can also go with that. The rest also have their own versions, but these two right here are probably the best. The weapon skill, for some reason, unleashes a ton of damage per second, especially when aimed at surfaces, so pulling off a single charged L2 with the Ash of War is going to absolutely wreck enemies. Just don't aim at them, instead aim at their feet, and it's pretty much GG's. And that's pretty much it with the top 15, well, 16 in this case, weapons in the game. We went over with a bonus over there. So let me know down below if there's any other weapon in the game that you found to be very good against DLC bosses and DLC encounters. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.